On Monday morning at 8:13 a.m., something was wrong. Deeply wrong. I stood in the break room of Elysian Tech, staring at an empty countertop where the coffee machine used to be. No note. No explanation. Just a faint outline in the dust, like a chalk outline at a crime scene. My stomach dropped. Not because I'm addicted to caffeine, okay, maybe a little, but because in this building, coffee wasn't just coffee, it was survival. It was the unspoken peace treaty between exhausted teams and unrealistic deadlines. And no, it was gone. I opened my inbox. New email. Subject line: Welcome to a wellness-centered workplace. I clicked. It was from HR. And what followed read like satire, except no one was laughing. As part of our ongoing mission to promote holistic well-being, we've transitioned away from caffeinated dependency in favor of natural hydration alignment. End of sec. Excuse me? Please enjoy our new refresh stations featuring cucumber, lime fusion, and ambient temperature chamomile mist. Cucumber lime fusion? Is this a tech company or a spa for monks? That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not just from disappointment, but from something deeper. Resentment. Frustration. The quiet rage of being ignored for so long that they forgot who actually keeps this place running. I glanced around. My team looked like zombie shallow-eyed, blinking slowly, gripping empty mugs like security blankets. This wasn't about coffee anymore. This was about control. About someone, somewhere, deciding we didn't matter enough to be consulted. Just changed the rules and expected us to clap. So I didn't clap. I walked out of that room with a buzzing in my chest and a question in my head. If they could take this away so easily, what else did they think they could erase? If you've ever had something small taken from you, something that kept you going, drop a single dot in the comments. Sometimes, the quietest symbols carry the loudest pain. Because I wasn't just angry, I was awake. And they had no idea what that would cost them. My name's Harper. I'm 46, a senior operations supervisor at Elysian Tech, and until recently, the unofficial engine that kept this place from collapsing under its own buzzwords. I've been here 14 years. Long enough to survive 5 reorgs, 3 CEOs, and a global crisis that nearly gutted our supply chain. I've stayed late to fix client escalations that weren't mine. I've trained every junior manager who now walks past me like they invented leadership. I've worked weekends, birthdays, even the week my daughter got accepted into college. Why? Because I believed in what we were building. Until the morning the coffee disappeared. It sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud, I know. But if you've ever worked somewhere long enough, you learn that it's never about just one thing. It's the 100 little cuts you're told to ignore. The unpaid hours. The canceled raises. The team-building events that are just cover for budget slashing. And now, this quiet erasure of comfort, of routine, of the one small ritual that made us human in a building obsessed with optimization. No one said a word. Not at first. People shuffled around the office that week like grief counselors at a funeral for morale. The silence was louder than usual. Eyes didn't meet. Mugs sat unused. Conversations about code reviews were peppered with sighs and throat clears, and, occasionally, someone whispering, "I heard it's permanent." At our department meeting that Friday, my boss Emma, 31, MBA, speaks in hashtags, told us the change was a step forward in creating a cleaner internal culture. She smiled like she believed it. Like this wasn't just the latest attempt to dress budget cuts in wellness lingo. I nodded. Everyone did. Because that's what we've been trained to do. Nod. Smile. Stay in line. But inside, something started boiling. See, the thing about being in operations is you see everything. You know what happens when a system gets pushed too far without proper feedback loops. You know when an efficiency initiative is really just code for cut corners and pray no one notices. And I noticed. I noticed that while they were cutting break room costs, our execs were upgrading their ergonomic chairs. I noticed that our CTO had a personal fridge installed in her office. I noticed that the company wellness newsletter now featured detox breathing exercises instead of actual health benefits. Most of all, I noticed how easily people started slipping into silence. Like this was just the new normal. I kept my mouth shut not because I agreed, but because I was 9 months away from vesting my pension. And with inflation climbing and my daughter texting me about textbook prices that look like plane tickets, quitting wasn't an option. So I watched, listened, and waited. Because there was something else happening beneath the surface. A tension. A shift. A quiet kind of rage that doesn't scream, it simmers. And when it boils over, it doesn't ask permission. They didn't see it. But I did. And soon, they would too. It was the monthly all-hands meeting. You know the type: forced smiles, lukewarm applause, and someone from HR handing out vegan granola bars like it makes up for another year without bonuses. We were crammed into the open concept collaboration space, which really just means folding chairs and a projector that hums louder than our raises. I took my usual spot in the second row, close enough to be respectful, far enough to zone out without being obvious. Then he took the mic. Chad Brenner, our shiny new CFO. The kind of man who wears AirPods in meetings where he's the one talking. He smiled like he was auditioning for a TED Talk that nobody asked for. Team, he said, pacing the floor like it owed him money. I want to talk about value alignment. I braced myself. When executives say value, they don't mean ethics, they mean metrics. And when they say alignment, they usually mean you're in the way. Chad clicked to the next slide, EA stock photo of someone doing yoga on a mountain. Big, bold words. Energy in, productivity out. He gestured at the screen. Some of you have noticed changes around the office: less dependency on caffeine, more emphasis on clean fuel. That's not a cost-cutting measure, that's a mindset shift. A few people nodded. I didn't. Then he said it. If coffee is the only thing motivating you to show up every day, maybe it's time to ask yourself if this is the right place for you. Silence. Not the polite kind. Not the kind where people are waiting for the next slide. This was the kind of silence that hangs in the air like smoke. The kind that says, did he really just say that out loud? I felt something sharp crawl up my spine: anger, humiliation, disbelief. A cocktail of every time someone had dismissed the labor it takes to just exist in these places. I looked around. No one moved. Donna from procurement blinked twice, like trying to make sure she'd heard right. Kevin from data analytics stopped chewing his pen cap. Even Emma, my manager, glanced at me and then quickly looked away. Chad smiled like he delivered some brilliant truth bomb, completely oblivious to the fact that he had just insulted half the room. And maybe that was the point. It wasn't just a comment about coffee. It was a message. We don't care what keeps you going. We only care that you keep going. That was the spark. The moment I realized this place wasn't just cutting costs, it was cutting connection, cutting humanity, reducing us to rows in a spreadsheet, easily replaced, easily dismissed. I didn't say anything. Not then. I sat back in my chair, legs crossed, arms still. But inside, something had been lit. And I wasn't the only one who felt it. I could see it on their faces: the slow burn. The quiet fury of people who've given too much for too long, and were just told they mattered less than a cappuccino. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No yelling. No public breakdown. Just me, alone in the restroom, staring at the stain on my blouse. It was a faint, oval-shaped ring coffee, dried and sunken into the sleeve. I hadn't noticed it that morning. But now, under the harsh fluorescent light, it felt like a spotlight. A quiet reminder of everything I'd swallowed to keep going. I remembered the day that stain first landed. It was 3 months ago. Inventory, meltdown. Vendor system crashed mid-cycle. I stayed until 1 a.m., patching numbers manually while Chad and the other execs sipped cocktails on a rooftop mixer they called strategic culture bonding. That coffee stain had been a badge of commitment, a mark of the grind. Now it just looked sad. I took a deep breath, tried to shake it off, and walked back to my desk. The office buzzed with fake calm. No one mentioned the meeting, no one dared. But I felt it, the undercurrent tightening, like the building itself was holding its breath. Later that afternoon, as I scrolled through my inbox pretending to care about a revised facilities maintenance calendar, I saw a company-wide message pop in. Subject: a new kind of energy, wellness resources you'll love. I clicked. Regretted it instantly. There it was again. Pastel graphics, soft fonts, buzzwords like hydration harmony and mindful momentum. One bullet point read, "Try replacing your morning coffee ritual with a moment of gratitude reflection." Dizzy. Gratitude? I glanced around the room. Donna had her head in her hands. Kevin was microwaving leftover oatmeal that smelled like surrender. Emma stood stiffly by the printer, scanning a document as if her life depended on it. And me? I was clutching a lukewarm paper cup of cucumber-lime fusion, trying not to gag. My body needed caffeine. My spirit needed dignity. And neither was on the wellness menu. I minimized the email, opened a spreadsheet, closed it again. My fingers hovered over the keyboard like they were waiting for instructions I didn't believe in anymore. And then I cracked. Not loudly, not obviously, just enough to feel something split. I opened my resume. It had been years since I touched it. The file name was still Harper, Final for Real 2. Docs, from a decade ago. I updated the formatting, reworded a few bullet points, added some things I was quietly proud of. Cross-functional implementation strategies. Emergency procurement modeling. Basically, Code 4 held it together while everyone else panicked. But as I stared at the screen, one line hit me hard. Dedicated team player who supports company values with consistency and poise. I blinked. What values? Since when did pretending everything was fine count as poise? I deleted the sentence. Then deleted 2 more. It wasn't just about updating a resume. It was the first time I'd allowed myself to imagine a version of my life outside these walls. That thought alone was terrifying. And freeing. I closed the laptop. Looked out the window. The sun was dipping behind the skyline, casting long shadows across the parking lot. It was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before a storm. And deep down, I knew something was coming. I just didn't know yet that I would be the one bringing it. It started with a text I almost ignored. I was in the frozen food aisle at H-E-B, debating between 2 kinds of lasagna, both on sale, both equally bad for my blood pressure. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I nearly let it go, figuring it was a pharmacy refill reminder or another one of those corporate wellness nudges telling me to hydrate and smile. But something made me check. Logan. You still at Elysian? Might be a biz thing. Call me if you're not swamped. I blinked at the name. Logan. My ex-brother-in-law. We hadn't talked in, 6 months? Maybe longer. Last time we saw each other was Thanksgiving, 2 years ago, when he brought his espresso machine in the back of his truck because he said, Harper deserves better than powdered creamer and prayers. Logan used to run a boutique coffee supply business, aged barrel roasters, that kept a handful of corporate clients in Central Texas buzzing and loyal. Elysian had been one of them. Until 6 months ago, when the company dropped him in favor of a streamlined sourcing model. Translation: cheaper beans from a faceless distributor in Idaho. I stared at the message. Then at the lasagna. Then typed back. Still here. What's up? He replied in under 30 seconds. Got a bunch of equipment I'm liquidating. Contracts gone. Inventory stacked up. Might have a workaround if you're open to weird. Weird? That could mean anything coming from Logan. I met him the next morning in the parking lot of a hardware store off 6th Street. He was unloading dented boxes from the back of his van, coffee grinders, insulated bulk carafes, branded mugs, all with the Sage Barrel logo scratched off like a breakup you don't want to talk about. Damn, I said, stepping closer. You're really shutting it down? He shrugged, dragging out a crate of compostable cups. 6 contracts gone in 2 months. Elysian started the domino effect. Everyone else followed. Heverfor. I winced. I didn't make that decision. I know, he said quickly, not bitter, just tired. But it's wild, right? You lose one big fish, the pond drains fast. He rubbed the back of his neck and looked over at me. But here's the thing, he added, lowering his voice like we were planning a heist. Those contracts, they don't have to die. Just need new skin. Fresh name, new branding, clean slate. I raised an eyebrow. You talking about rebranding Sage Barrel? He smirked. Number. I'm selling it. The shell. The equipment. The contacts. Blank canvas. Someone with fire in their belly could take it and make it mean something again. I laughed, but it came out cracked. Logan, I run spreadsheets and yell at interns for using Comic Sans. I'm not exactly a caffeine mogul. He tilted his head. You know more about this building, how it breathes, how it bleeds than the people running it. That's leverage. You don't need a degree in entrepreneurship. You just need righteous anger. That phrase hit differently. Righteous anger. It didn't sound reckless. It sounded right. Like a storm that had waited too long to break. I drove home that night, with frozen lasagna in the trunk, and something unfamiliar stirring in my chest. Not just resentment, not just frustration. Possibility. A door hadn't just opened. It had creaked wide and dared me to walk through it. The decision didn't happen in a boardroom or during some lightning bolt epiphany. It happened on my back porch, with a glass of red wine cheap enough to peel paint and a yellow legal pad that still had grocery lists from last year on the back. I wrote one word at the top of the page. Emberleaf. It sounded soft but powerful. A contradiction. Like warmth that burns if you're not careful. Exactly what I needed. Logan gave me access to everything: equipment, vendor connections, even leftover packaging supplies. In return, I wired over a good chunk of my emergency savings. The roof leak or root canal fund. All in. We filed the LLC in Oregon under a burner email and a rented P.O. box to keep it clean. I built a website in one night using a $22 Squarespace template and a font that screamed organic luxury without actually saying anything. Then I wrote the mission statement. Small batch. Ethically sourced. Mindfully caffeinated. Built for balance in a chaotic world. I couldn't believe how easy it was to speak their language. The language of HR decks and Slack emojis. The same jargon they used to cut us off from the one thing that made mornings bearable. Next came the visual branding: leaf icons, earth tone gradients, photos of steaming mugs held by hands in soft sweaters. My daughter's college roommate designed the logo in exchange for a Target gift card. And then, the pitch. Every quarter, Elysian opens its procurement cycle to alternative vendor submissions. It's meant to show transparency, foster competition, blah blah blah. But everyone knows the lowest bid usually wins unless someone sneaks in with wellness value baked into the pricing. So, that's what I did. Emberleaf's proposal came in at 3.2 times what they used to pay Logan's old company. But I padded it with biodegradable cups, certified compostable packaging, single-origin Guatemalan beans, and a morale wellness packet that included a printable gratitude journal and a 5-minute mindfulness onboarding guide for new hires. I stared at the submission email before I clicked send. My hands were cold, my pulse steady. Not because I wasn't scared, but because I was ready. I wasn't trying to scam them. I was giving them exactly what they said they wanted. A coffee supplier that aligned with their brand values. An experience they could overpay for and feel good about doing it. And if you're wondering whether it was personal, of course it was. This was for every team that stayed late and got a thank you emoji instead of a bonus. For every parent on the payroll who'd had to mute their guilt during school plays because of unexpected meetings. For every time someone like Chad smirked from a stage and implied we were lucky just to be there. If you've ever had to bite your tongue to keep a paycheck, drop a dot in the comments. Not because it's small, but because it's too big to say out loud. I closed the laptop, Saturday back, and waited. What they didn't know was that Emberleaf wasn't just a company. It was a Trojan horse. And I'd just rolled it straight through the front gates. 2 weeks passed before I heard anything. I had started to think maybe the proposal got buried, or maybe I'd pushed too far. 3.2 times the old cost wasn't exactly subtle. But then, on a Tuesday morning, somewhere between pretending to care about font choices in a PowerPoint and deleting my fourth Hydrate Mindfully email of the day, there it was. Subject: Approved vendor selection. Emberleaf Roasters. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time, just to be sure the letters hadn't rearranged themselves out of spite. Approved. We were in. New questions asked. New counteroffer. Just a templated response and a thank you for supporting Elysian's culture of conscious sourcing. I almost laughed out loud. Later that day, during the weekly budget sync, Chad stood at the front of the room grinning like a man who'd discovered fire. Or at least rediscovered coffee. Good news, he announced, holding up a sleek silver Emberleaf thermos. After extensive vendor review, we've secured a new supplier that fully aligns with our company values. Coffee's back, baby. Applause. Actual applause. People clapped like they'd just been told they could go home early on a Friday. Donna teared up. Kevin raised both fists in the air like he'd just won a fantasy football championship. Someone in the back whispered, "Praise be." And Chatty beamed. Like he'd negotiated this miracle himself. Like he hadn't personally killed the old supplier to optimize costs 6 months ago. I sat near the back, holding a paper cup of cucumber water, smiling just enough not to stand out. My hands were steady, my breath even. But inside, I was on fire. Because they had no idea. No idea that the beans they were swooning over came from the same vendor they had ghosted without warning. No idea that the sleek new thermoses had been sitting in Logan's garage 6 weeks ago, gathering dust and regret. And no idea that I had built Emberleaf from my couch with a burner email, a bottle of grocery store wine, and a hard drive full of quiet rage. By Thursday, Emberleaf thermoses were everywhere. In meetings. On desks. Even on Chad's Instagram story, which he captioned, "Fueling innovation the clean way." A had no clue. The break room transformed almost overnight. Gone were the sad little hydration stations and condescending wellness posters. In their place stood polished silver dispensers, compostable stirrers, and bulk bags of coffee stamped with inspirational phrases like "grounded in purpose" and "brew with intention." Oh, you would have thought we'd won the World Cup. Donna took one sip and actually whispered, "I can feel again." Kevin saluted me with his mug, not knowing I'd ordered the labels myself on a website that also sells ironic tote bags. It was surreal, watching something I built secretly in the margin stake over the very space that had tried to strip us of what little joy we had left. But I didn't feel guilt. Not even a flicker. Because I hadn't lead. I hadn't stolen. I'd simply followed the rules they made just better than they ever expected me to. And as I walked past the break room, inhaling the rich, bitter scent of Emberleaf's dark roast wafting through the vents, I realized something. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a cog. I felt like the one turning the machine. At first, it was perfect. Coffee flowed. Spirits lifted. HR sent out a glowing internal memo titled, "Small Changes, Big Impact." How Emberleaf helped boost morale. People were smiling again, lingering in the break room just a little longer, laughing at things that weren't even funny. The energy was different, lighter, warmer, real. And Chad? He basked in it like a cat in a sunbeam. Every time someone complimented the new brew, he'd casually say, "Glad you're enjoying it." Knew it would be a game changer. As if he'd handpicked every bean himself while hiking barefoot through Central America. I played along. Quietly. Smiling when appropriate. Pretending I didn't know that the office was now running on caffeine and a perfectly calibrated illusion. But perfect never lasts. It started small, an email from procurement forwarded to the wrong inbox. Subject line: Emberleaf invoice Q2, triple cost. Then a Slack message accidentally left open on a shared monitor. Does anyone know who approved this vendor? This markup's insane. Then came the audit request. Not formal. Not aggressive. Just a soft ping from finance, asking HR for clarity on vendor selection criteria. Phrased politely, the way sharks circle before they strike. I knew the signs. I'd seen them before during vendor shakeups, system overhauls, layoffs, that subtle shift in tone. The tightening of language. People lower their voices. Meetings behind closed doors. The whispers had begun. And still, Chad wasn't worried. In the next leadership huddle, when someone brought up breakroom supply cost inflation, he waved a hand and chuckled. Listen, he said, sipping his own Emberleaf roast. Nobody's complaining when morale's up. We're not running a soup kitchen, we're running a machine, and coffee is the oil. I noted the quote. Word for word. Filed it mentally under future Exhibit A. But I also felt something else, something I hadn't expected. Nerves. The kind that crawl up your spine and settle in the back of your throat. The kind that remind you you're no longer invisible. Because it wasn't just finance asking questions. A marketing intern named Leela, bright-eyed and dangerous, was pitching a feel-good article for the internal newsletter. Local vendor spotlight, she called it. She'd started Googling Emberleaf. Found the website, found the branding. Found me. Not directly, but close enough. 2 years ago, in a moment of pre-pandemic idealism, I'd started a tiny blog called Brewkind. A side project. Just thoughts on coffee, culture, sustainability, workplace rituals. Nobody read it. But I'd mentioned Elysian by name in one post. Once. And of course, that was the post Lila stumbled on. She flagged it to her supervisor, who passed it to communications, who looped in legal. Within a day, it was on the desk of someone with compliance, in their title and a permanent scowl etched into their face. I deleted the blog in under 10 minutes. Scrubbed my LinkedIn. Changed my personal email signature. Logan called twice both times from blocked numbers. They're digging, he said bluntly. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Because suddenly, everything felt different. It wasn't a secret anymore. It was a fuse. And it was getting shorter by the hour. It hit on a Tuesday. Because of course it did. Tuesdays are the worst. Mondays get all the blame, but Tuesday's the one where everyone's tired and expected to perform. It was barely 9:15 a.m. And I was microwaving day-old oatmeal when the ping came through. Subject. Internal report. Confidential circulation. Only. Sender. Anonymous. Attached. PDF. The subject line alone made my stomach twist. I knew that format, that tone. I clicked. It was a side-by-side timeline. On one side, Chad's budget presentations from the past 2 quarters, bold promises of cost-neutral morale programs, lean operational recalibrations, and his now infamous slide titled The Era of Efficient Culture. On the other, Emberleaf's full invoice history. Every price point, every inflated line item, every approval, with Chad's initials in the signature field. Color-coded. Annotated. With arrows pointing directly from his cost-saving graphs to the actual tripled vendor expenses. The author didn't just connect dots, they built a blinking neon trail with footnotes and flair. I scrolled, heart pounding. Then I saw my name. Not directly, but in the footnotes of a flagged blog post. The one I had deleted. Someone had saved a cached version. Highlighted the paragraph where I mentioned Elysian's outdated breakroom policy and the need for employee-driven solutions. That alone wasn't damning. But next to it was a screenshot of Emberleaf's domain registration info. My burner email. Masked, yes, but not masked enough. They were closing in. I stood frozen in the kitchen, oatmeal going cold, as dread rose in my throat like bile. It was all happening faster than I thought it would. Logan called 20 minutes later. You see it? Yeah. I've already had 2 voicemails from someone in compliance oversight, he said, voice clipped. They're not asking questions, they're circling. I nodded, even though he couldn't see. My mind raced, calculating fallout. If they traced everything back to me, what would it cost? Not just the Emberleaf contract. My job, my pension, my reputation, everything I'd built, inside and outside those walls. And worse? I wouldn't even get to control the story. Someone else would. Someone with a badge, or a title, or a grudge. For the first time since this started, I felt panic. Real, white-hot fear. Not the kind that motivates, the kind that paralyzes. I paced the living room like it might help. The folder with my Emberleaf records sat on the couch, unopened. I stared at it like it might combust if I got too close. Was I wrong? Had I gone too far? Then something shifted. I remembered that meeting months ago. The one where Chad said, if coffee is the only thing keeping you going, maybe this isn't the right place for you. And I realized this was never about revenge. It was about power. About being seen. I hadn't lied. I hadn't cheated. I'd built something quietly, carefully, and yes, strategically. But it was real. And every dollar Emberleaf charged had been approved, documented, celebrated. If I was the villain in their story, fine. But I wasn't about to let them write the ending. If you've ever had to hide your brilliance just to keep your job, tell me, what would you do if the mask slipped? Let it fall, or pull it tighter? I walked to the couch, picked up the folder, and started printing the truth. The meeting invite landed with no explanation. Subject: urgent, budget clarification session, mandatory. Location: 14th floor, conference room. B. Time: 3 p.m. sharp. That alone was enough to set everyone on edge. No agenda, no context. Just corporate dread dressed up in Outlook formatting. By 2:55, the hallway was buzzing with nervous speculation. I kept my head down, folder in hand, blazer buttoned, expression flat. I wasn't invited, not officially. But I knew I'd be called in. At 3 o'clock on the dot, the door opened. Inside, the conference room felt colder than usual, like someone had cranked the AC to keep the tension from boiling over. Chad stood near the projector, sleeves rolled, tie loose, posture all faux confidence. Across from him sat the board's finance lead, 2 VPs, and a woman I'd only ever seen in security briefings, compliance oversight. This wasn't a discussion. This was a reckoning. The screen behind Chad lit up with bar charts and spreadsheets. He launched into his usual song and dance cost efficiencies, cultural alignment, strategic morale initiatives. He even cracked a joke about how Emberleaf had energized the company better than a trust fall ever could. Nobody laughed. Then the finance lead cut him off. We've been reviewing the numbers. Breakroom expenses are up 212% this quarter. You pushed it through under a discretionary morale clause. That clause was designed for emergency use only. Chad didn't blink. It was an emergency. Morale had tanked. We were losing productivity. You approved a vendor with 0 background check, signed off on triple cost per unit, and cited a wellness philosophy that came from a printable journal packet. I was operating under pressure to deliver results. Chad snapped. And it worked. Look at the engagement numbers. Look at the retention curve. Let's look at this, said the compliance officer, lifting a single page. It was an Emberleaf invoice. Chad's signature at the bottom, highlighted. Next to it, a memo he'd sent to the board 3 weeks prior claiming cost savings across employee experience sectors. And finally, an anonymous report timeline showing the contradiction in plain daylight. Chad went pale. This is being taken out of context. That's when the board chair, stern, silver-haired, and known for saying very little, looked up from her notes and said, "Bring her in." The door opened. They meant me. I walked in without hesitation, folder under my arm, heart pounding hard but steady. Chad turned and saw me. His face twisted into something between fury and disbelief. You, he hissed. I'm here to clarify the timeline, I said calmly. I placed my folder on the table and laid everything out, every approval form, every email, every line item. I spoke without theatrics. No embellishments. Just facts. Clear, documented. Irrefutable. I didn't manipulate the system, I said. I used the system exactly as it was built. I submitted a bid. You approved it. Chad exploded. She set me up. This is sabotage. No, I said, meeting his eyes for the first time. This is accountability. Security entered quietly, as if on cue. One of them gently guided Chad toward the door. He didn't go quietly, of course threatened legal action, shouted about betrayal. But it didn't matter. The door shut behind him with a satisfying click. The room was still for a long moment. Then someone finally spoke. Miss Ellison, the board chair said, how would you feel about helping us fix what's left? There was no confetti, no champagne, just a quiet meeting room, one empty chair, and a lingering scent of vanilla bean coffee. Chad was gone by the end of the week. The official memo used the usual euphemisms: resigned to pursue other opportunities, grateful for his contributions, effective immediately. Translation: escorted out with a cardboard box and a warning not to touch company servers. People whispered. HR reshuffled. 2 senior managers retired early. The phrase interim restructuring floated around like an air freshener no one asked for. And me? I got a new badge, new title, new office, 3rd floor, corner view, real door that shuts both ways. Efficiency advisor to executive operations. 6 figures. Stock options. My name on the org chart, right under the COO. It felt surreal. Not because I didn't believe I earned it, but because the same system that tried to erase me was now asking me to help rebuild it. The same board that once nodded politely during my budget briefings was now listening, really listening to how we fix things. I didn't start by making speeches. I started by watching. I walked the halls, talked to the admin staff. Saturday in break rooms. I asked the questions no one had bothered to ask in years. What's not working? What's wasting your time? What's making you dread Monday? And when I listened, really listened, I heard it. The ache. The weariness behind the polite small talk. People who had given everything, year after year, and been rewarded with pizza Fridays and fake flex time. So, we started small. New PTO policies. Real ones. Expanded mental health benefits. No more buried links in the HR portal. Flexible scheduling for working parents. Better vendor transparency. And yes, better coffee. Emberleaf stayed. Of course it did. But now it was out in the open. Fully registered, fully contracted, fully integrated with me as majority stakeholder, and Logan handling logistics under a newly formed distributor label. The break room transformed again, but this time, it wasn't a cover-up. It was a choice. Barista-grade espresso machines. Compostable pods. Cold brew taps. Ceramic mugs with the company values printed on the inside, where people would actually see them while sipping. Donna cried. Kevin said the cortado made him believe in God. But my favorite moment came on a random Thursday. I was walking past the break room when I overheard a new hire say, "This place feels different, like somebody here actually gives a damn." I didn't say anything, just kept walking. But in that moment, something landed deep and quietly inside me. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. Taking back something that had been hollowed out by numbers, by ego, by indifference, and filling it with something better. Not perfection, not performance, but purpose. People started caring again. And when they did, something shifted. Not just the culture, not just the mood. The company shifted. Slowly, steadily, and without needing a single pastel infographic to prove it. The sun was just starting to set when the email came in. No subject line. Just a single sentence in the preview bar. "Thank you for making this place feel human again." It was from Mallory, one of our newest hires. 25, fresh out of grad school, sharp as a tack and quiet in meetings. She'd never said much before, but this hit different. I sat back in my office seat closed, shoes kicked off under the desk, a half-drunk macchiato cooling beside my keyboard. Outside, the floor buzzed with late-day energy. Not anxiety, not exhaustion, just people finishing good work with clear minds. The kind of energy I hadn't felt here in years. And I thought back to where it started. Not with a business plan. Not with a pitch deck or a promotion. It started with a cup of coffee. It started with the absence of one. That empty break room. That passive-aggressive email. That smug line from Chad. If coffee is the only reason you show up, that's what cracked it open. Not because it was about caffeine, but because it wasn't. It was about everything we're told to accept, to swallow, to endure. The little indignities that pile up until you forget what being valued even feels like. We tell ourselves, it's not that bad. At least I still have a job. I'll say something next time. But the truth is, we shrink. Quietly. Strategically. To survive. And then one day, if we're lucky, something small wakes us up. A missing machine. A forgotten name. A stain on a sleeve that never came out. That's when we remember we were never asking for too much. We were just asking not to be erased. And no, I don't think everyone needs to go build a fake brand or take down a corrupt CFO to reclaim their power. Sometimes it starts smaller than that. It starts with telling the truth. With standing still when they expect you to fold. With choosing not to laugh when the room pressures you to. With looking someone like Chad in the face and saying, you don't get to define what matters. Because that's the lesson. They don't get to decide what your value is. You do. If this story made something in you shift even just a little, hit that subscribe button. Not because I asked, but because someone else out there might need a reminder that their worth isn't up for negotiation. I closed the email from Mallory. Smiled. Then I picked up my cup. Took a sip. Still warm. Still bold. Still mine.